The evening air was thick with the scent of grilled meat and laughter as the Wilson family gathered for their annual reunion. The backyard was alive with chatter, children darting between tables, and the warm glow of string lights casting soft shadows on familiar faces. But beneath the surface of shared memories and forced smiles, something dark lurked, something that had been festering for 16 years. Natalie Wilson stood by the drink table, fingers clenched around the stem of her wine glass. Her husband, Daniel, was in the center of the crowd, animated as he recounted some old college story. Beside him stood Claire, her brother's wife. Claire laughed at all the right moments, her hand occasionally grazing Daniel's arm in a way that had always made Natalie's stomach twist. For years, she had ignored it. Dismissed it as paranoia. But 2 nights ago, an anonymous email changed everything. Attached were hotel receipts, photographs, even a message exchange between Daniel and Claire. 16 years. It had started before Claire had even married her brother. Now, the truth burned inside her, demanding release. Natalie set down her glass and stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. I think it's time for a toast. The conversations died down as heads turned. Daniel raised his beer with a grin, oblivious. What's the occasion? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. To family. To trust. And to secrets that refused to stay buried. She lifted her phone, tapping the screen. To 16 years of betrayal. The speakers crackled to life. A voice message played, a recording of Daniel whispering in the dark. Asterisk, you know I love you, Claire. I always have. Being with her means nothing. Asterisk, the silence was deafening. Faces paled. Claire's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the patio stones. Natalie's brother, Mark, turned toward his wife, his face blank with shock. Daniel's grin disappeared. Natalie, let's talk about this. No, she cut him off, her voice calm. You've had 16 years to talk. The reunion was over. The family, once whole, now stood in jagged, irreparable pieces. And Natalie? She walked away, leaving the wreckage behind. Natalie didn't look back. As she stepped off the patio, the stunned silence behind her cracked into chaos, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, glass crunching underfoot. Mark was shouting. Claire was crying. And Daniel. Daniel was chasing after her. Natalie, wait. His footsteps were heavy against the pavement, but she didn't stop. She reached her car, her hand steady as she unlocked the door. Just let me explain, he pleaded, grabbing her wrist before she could open it. She turned, her eyes colder than he'd ever seen them. Explain what, Daniel? How you slept with my brother's wife for 16 years. How you sat across from me at dinner, held my hand, promised me love while sneaking off to her. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word sliced through him like glass. Daniel exhaled sharply, his grip loosening. It wasn't like that. Natalie let out a sharp laugh. Wasn't like what? A betrayal? A complete and utter humiliation? Tell me, Daniel, in what world does screwing my sister-in-law behind my back for half our marriage not count as that? His mouth opened, but there was no answer. Just guilt. The porch light cast long shadows, stretching over the lawn where Mark stood, his fists clenched at his sides. His face was unreadable, but his breathing was ragged, uneven. Claire was just behind him, arms wrapped around herself, her mascara smudged with tears. Natalie shifted her gaze to her brother. How long have you known? Mark's jaw tensed. I didn't. Claire flinched at his tone. Mark, he held up a hand, his voice like stone. Don't. For the first time that night, Claire looked truly afraid. Natalie took a deep breath and turned back to Daniel. I want a divorce. The words landed like a gunshot. Claire gasped. Mark blinked. And Daniel, he just stood there, stunned. Maybe he had expected anger, screaming, even violence. But not this. Natalie, please, she shook her head. You made your choice. 16 years ago. She got into the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without another word. Behind her, she could still see the wreckage, her husband, her brother, her sister-in-law, all standing under the glow of the porch light, their lives unraveling piece by piece. She should have felt broken. But as the night swallowed the road ahead of her, all she felt was free. The highway stretched ahead, endless and dark, but Natalie's mind was sharper than ever. No more second-guessing. No more pretending. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Daniel. Again. She ignored it. The next message, however, made her stomach tighten. Mark ***, call me. Now, ***, she hesitated, then picked up. Mark. His voice was hoarse. Where are you? Driving. A pause. Then, low and sharp, Claire's gone. Natalie gripped the wheel tighter. Gone. Mark exhaled shakily. She left. Took her purse, her keys, and just disappeared. I went inside to clear my head, and when I came back out, she was nowhere. A strange unease settled in Natalie's chest. Did she say anything? No. But, Nat, something's wrong. She didn't just leave, she ran. Natalie frowned. Claire had always been composed, even in the worst moments. The image of her standing there, mascara-streaked and trembling, flashed in her mind. Daniel? She asked. Still here. Pacing. Looks like he's about to lose it. Good, she thought. Let him. I don't care where she went, Natalie said, but the words felt hollow. Mark's silence was heavy. Then, quietly, I think you should. Natalie pulled over, her heartbeat suddenly uneven. Why? Mark hesitated, then, with the weight of something awful, said, because I just found a note in her purse. The world around Natalie slowed. What did it say? His voice barely above a whisper, **, I'm sorry. I can't fix this. **, a chill ran through her. Claire wasn't just running. She was hiding. Or worse. And for the first time since this all began, Natalie felt something new. Fear. Natalie gripped the phone tighter. Where was the note? In her purse, Mark said. Tucked inside like she didn't want anyone to find it right away. His voice was off, strained, distant. Nat, this isn't just guilt. I think she's scared. Natalie exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think. Did she take her car? No. Keys are gone, but her car's still in the driveway. She left on foot. The unease in her chest deepened. Claire was impulsive, but she wasn't reckless. Running into the night with no plan. That wasn't her. What about Daniel? Mark scoffed. Freaking out. Keeps saying he needs to talk to her, but I swear, Nat, there's something off about him. He won't stop pacing, keeps muttering that she shouldn't have left. Natalie's stomach twisted. Daniel was a liar, a cheat, but was he dangerous? She had never thought so before. But now. Mark, listen to me, she said carefully. Check the house. See if anything else is missing, clothes, cash, anything. If she was really running, she would have taken more than her purse. There was a pause. You think someone took her? I don't know, she admitted. But if Claire left that note, it means she didn't want to face something. Or someone. The silence stretched. Then Mark muttered, I'll check. Natalie hung up, her hands shaking as she reached for the ignition. She was supposed to be done with this mess. She was supposed to be driving away. But now. Now she had to go back. Natalie turned the car around, her heart pounding harder with each mile back to the house. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Claire might have been selfish, deceitful, a homewrecker, but she wasn't stupid. If she left in a panic, it meant she knew something. Or she was running from something. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the reunion was nothing but a wreckage of half-empty glasses and abandoned plates. The guests were gone. Only Mark's car and Daniel's remained. The porch light flickered slightly, casting long, uneasy shadows. Mark was waiting for her at the front door. His face was pale. I checked. And she didn't pack anything. No clothes, no suitcase. Just took her purse and vanished. He hesitated. But, Nat. I found something else. He held out Claire's phone. Natalie took it, her fingers ice cold. The screen was cracked, as if it had been dropped, or grabbed in a hurry. Where did you find this? Between the couch cushions. Like she shoved it there or it slipped when he stopped himself. When she struggled, Natalie's breath caught. Did you look through it? Mark swallowed. It's locked. But I saw one thing before the screen timed out. She stared at him. What? He ran a hand over his face, his jaw tight with something like dread. A text. From an unsaved number. He hesitated, then repeated it word for word. You think he loves you? You think he'd choose you over me? Watch your back, Claire, Natalie's blood turned to ice. The worst part? The message wasn't from her, which meant someone else knew. Someone else was watching. And now Claire was gone. Behind them, the front door creaked open. Daniel stepped onto the porch, his face cast in shadow. His voice was eerily calm. Did you find her? Natalie turned slowly, gripping Claire's phone so tightly it might crack further. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. The man she had spent years with, the man she thought she knew, looked like a stranger. Mark tensed beside her. No. She's gone. Left her car, left her clothes, left her phone. His voice was razor sharp. But you already knew that, didn't you? Daniel's expression didn't change. What the hell are you implying? Natalie stepped forward. Where is she, Daniel? His jaw clenched. How would I know? She held up the phone. Then explain this. His eyes flickered to the cracked screen. Too quick. A fraction of a second too long. He recognized it, Natalie's stomach turned. I don't know what that is, he said, but his voice had changed. Tighter. Controlled. Mark took a step forward, his fists clenched. Cut the bullshit. You were the last one to talk to her before she ran. Daniel let out a slow breath, rubbing his face like he was exhausted. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Natalie took another step, her pulse hammering. Because I think she was afraid of you. His eyes snapped to hers, dark and cold. You think I did something to her? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jesus, Natalie. You find out about an affair and suddenly I'm a murderer. Natalie didn't blink. You tell me. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the house. Natalie exhaled, her chest tight. Mark shifted beside her. He's hiding something. She nodded. And we're going to find out what. Because Claire was gone. And something told Natalie that if they didn't move fast, she wasn't coming back. Natalie didn't waste another second. She pushed past Daniel, stepping into the house before he could shut the door on them. Mark was right behind her, his presence a solid wall of tension. Daniel turned, his expression dark. What the hell are you doing? Natalie ignored him. The living room was eerily still, the air thick with something wrong. The couch cushions were slightly askew, where Claire's phone had been buried. A half-empty wine glass sat on the coffee table, lipstick smudged on the rim. Claire's. She had been here, but something was missing. Natalie scanned the room, heart racing. Then it hit her. "Where's your phone, Daniel?" He scoffed. "What? Your phone?" She turned to him, voice steady. "Where is it?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, but she caught it. Mark stepped forward. "Hand it over." Daniel let out a sharp laugh. "You're both insane." But his hand twitched toward his pocket. Natalie crossed her arms. "You don't want us to see your messages, do you?" He clenched his jaw. "I have nothing to hide." "Then prove it." A beat of silence. Then Daniel slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. But before Natalie or Mark could take it, he turned the screen away, pressing something. Mark lunged. "Are you deleting something?" Daniel jerked back, gripping the phone tight. "Get the hell off me." But Mark was already wrestling it from his hands. Daniel shoved him, hard, but Mark was stronger. He yanked the phone away and stepped back before Daniel could grab it. Mark's face went pale. He turned the screen toward Natalie. A text thread was open. "Sent just an hour ago. To Claire. Asterisk, you don't run from me. You know what happens when you do, asterisk." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Natalie's feet. Daniel froze. Just for a second. Then he lunged, but Mark was faster. His fist collided with Daniel's jaw, sending him crashing into the coffee table. Glass shattered, wine spilling like blood across the floor. Natalie didn't flinch. She grabbed the phone from Mark's hands and read the message again. Claire wasn't just running from the affair. She was running for her life. Daniel groaned, rolling onto his side, clutching his jaw. Blood smeared the corner of his mouth. His eyes burned with rage, but there was something else there too, something darker. Fear. Mark stood over him, fists clenched. "You threatening my wife now?" His voice was deadly calm, but his hands shook with barely contained fury. Daniel spat blood onto the floor and let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Natalie knelt beside him, shoving the phone in his face. "This message, Daniel. You know what happens when you run. What the hell does that mean?" He stared at her, his breathing ragged. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Might lie again. But then something in him cracked. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes darted toward Mark. "Claire wasn't running from me," he said quietly. "She was running from him." Mark's body stiffened. "Who?" Daniel exhaled, wiping the blood from his mouth. "Her old boyfriend." His voice was low, deliberate. "Before she met you." "Before she met me." Natalie exchanged a glance with Mark. "You're lying." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Am I?" He gestured toward his phone. "Scroll up." Natalie's fingers trembled as she swiped through the messages. Further up, past his last text, were others. Claire's responses. Short, frantic. "He found me, I don't know what to do, Daniel, please, I need help." Natalie's breath caught. Mark's face darkened. "Who is he?" Daniel sat up, rubbing his jaw. His next words sent a chill through the room. "Claire's past isn't what you think." He looked directly at Mark. "Your wife was keeping secrets from you too." Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Natalie's mind raced. Claire's sudden panic. The missing car keys. The note. Claire wasn't just running from guilt. She was running from something far, far worse. Mark's breathing had changed, shallower, faster. His knuckles were still white from the punch he'd thrown, but now his grip on reality seemed to be slipping. He looked between Daniel and Natalie, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell are you saying?" Daniel wiped his mouth again, his expression grim. "I'm saying that Claire has been lying to you for years." Natalie's grip tightened on the phone. "Start talking. Now." Daniel exhaled. "It started before she met you. Before she met me. Claire was in a relationship with a man named Victor Lane." Mark blinked. "Who the hell is that?" Daniel hesitated, then continued, "She never told you because she was hiding from him. And for good reason." His voice dropped lower. "The guy was dangerous, Mark. Abusive. Controlling. She tried to leave him, but he didn't take no well. She filed a restraining order, but he always found her." Natalie's stomach twisted. Mark shook his head. He stopped, his throat bobbing as if trying to swallow down something bitter. "That doesn't make sense. Claire would have told me." Daniel's smile was grim. "Would she? Or would she do what she's always done, lie, pretend, cover her tracks?" Mark took a step back, like the weight of the words was physically pushing him. "How do you even know this?" Daniel rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "Because, Mark, she told me." Natalie felt the world tilt. Mark went rigid. "What?" Daniel sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Years ago. Back when the affair started." He gave Natalie a cautious glance, but she didn't flinch. "Now was not the time for anger." "She told me everything," Daniel continued. "How she had to move, change her name, cut off everyone she knew. How Victor used to track her, how she was terrified he'd come back." He exhaled. "And I think he just did." Silence. Natalie's pulse pounded. "You really expect us to believe that?" Daniel looked at her, his face unreadable. "Check the records. Victor Lane. Arrested twice. First for assault, against Claire, second time for violating the restraining order." Natalie's skin went cold. Mark swayed slightly. "Where is he now?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Out." Mark's head snapped up. "What?" "He was released last year." Daniel's voice was tight. "I didn't think anything of it. Claire told me he wouldn't find her again. But if she was texting me, if she was scared." Natalie swallowed hard. "Then maybe she wasn't running from you." Mark clenched his fists. "Then where the hell is she?" Daniel met his eyes. "If Victor's back." He hesitated, then finished, "She's either running for her life." A beat of silence. "Or it's already too late." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Suffocating. Mark's breathing was sharp, uneven. Natalie could see the war in his eyes, the rage, the betrayal, the fear. He wanted to hate Claire for everything she had done, but now there was something worse gnawing at him. The possibility that she was already dead. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, she wouldn't she couldn't, but the pieces were there." Claire's panic. The cryptic message. The missing keys. And now this, Victor Lane, a man she had been running from for years, possibly back in her life. Daniel sat on the floor, still rubbing his jaw where Mark had hit him. "Look, I know I'm the last person you want to listen to, but if Victor has her, we don't have time to stand around arguing." Mark snapped his head toward him. "You expect me to trust you?" Daniel sighed. "I don't care if you trust me. But you do want to find Claire, right?" Silence. Natalie, gripping Claire's phone, finally spoke. "We need to figure out where she went. If she didn't take her car, she had to be heading somewhere close, or someone picked her up." Mark inhaled sharply, like the thought had just clicked in his mind. He turned, grabbing his own phone and scrolling furiously. "She has a banking app," he muttered. "I know her password. Natalie raised an eyebrow. You track her money? Mark's jaw tightened. She's my wife. Or at least, I thought she was. He typed something in, then froze. His face went pale. Natalie stepped closer. What? Mark slowly turned the phone so they could see. A transaction. $500 withdrawn at a gas station just 20 minutes ago. Daniel sat up straighter. That's near the old train station. Natalie's heart pounded. If Claire had been running, she was looking for a way out. Mark's fingers curled around the phone. Then that's where we're going. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and stormed toward the door. Natalie hesitated, but only for a second. She shot a final glance at Daniel. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something unsettled. He knew more than he was saying. But she didn't have time to press him now. She turned and followed Mark out the door. The drive to the gas station was silent. Tense. Mark's grip on the steering wheel was tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Natalie sat beside him, Claire's phone still clutched in her lap. Every few seconds, she glanced at it, half expecting another message to appear. Nothing. She checked the banking app again. $500 withdrawn at 10:42 p.m., it was 11:15 now. Claire had a 20-minute head start. If she was still alive, Mark pulled into the gas station, tires screeching slightly as he braked. The place was nearly empty, just a single employee inside, scrolling on his phone behind the counter. The overhead lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows across the pavement. She was here, Mark muttered, scanning the lot. She had to be. Natalie spotted a security camera mounted above the entrance. We need to check the footage. Mark was already out of the car, marching toward the cashier. Natalie hurried after him. The cashier barely looked up as they entered. Welcome to, Mark slammed his palms on the counter. Did a woman come in here earlier? Dark blonde hair, about this tall, probably looked like she was in a hurry. The cashier blinked, startled. Maybe? I don't really, check the cameras. Mark's voice was sharp, controlled, but there was something wild in his eyes. Natalie placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. Then she turned to the cashier, offering a tight, forced smile. Please. It's important. The guy hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, okay, gimme a sec. He stepped into the back, and moments later, the grainy footage appeared on the small screen behind the counter. Natalie and Mark leaned in. 10:42 p.m. The timestamp flickered. Claire appeared. She rushed into the store, constantly looking over her shoulder. She went straight to the ATM, her hands shaking as she punched in the numbers. Then, something changed. Her whole body stiffened. She turned her head, slowly, toward the door. Natalie's heart pounded. She saw someone. Mark gritted his teeth. But who? Claire grabbed the cash and bolted. But before she reached the exit, the screen flickered again, and a shadow appeared outside. A tall figure, just beyond the glass. Standing still. Watching her. Claire hesitated for a second, just a second, then ran, the footage cut off as she disappeared beyond the camera's view. Natalie exhaled, gripping the edge of the counter. Where the hell did she go? The cashier shifted awkwardly. I mean, there's only one place she could go from here. They turned to him. He jerked his thumb toward the road. The train station. Mark was already moving before the cashier had even finished speaking. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door, his entire body tense with purpose. Natalie followed, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. As soon as they were back in the car, Mark floored the gas. The tires screeched, and they shot down the nearly empty road. She was running, Natalie murmured, staring out at the dark streets flying past them. She saw someone. She knew them. Mark didn't respond, his jaw locked so tightly she could see the muscle twitching. Natalie checked Claire's phone again. Nothing new. But her fingers swiped up, back to the old messages, back to the one she had seen earlier. Asterisk, you think he loves you? You think he'd choose you over me? Watch your back, Claire, asterisk, her stomach twisted. That wasn't from Daniel. And now, with what they knew about Victor. Mark, she said, her voice careful. If Victor found her, I don't want to hear it, he snapped. But, we don't know anything yet, he barked, gripping the wheel. We find her. Then we talk. Natalie pressed her lips together. He was scared. And under the anger, so was she. The train station loomed ahead. It was old, barely operational, one of those places that only saw a handful of passengers a day. Dimly lit, the overhead lights flickered against the cracked pavement. Mark parked without a word, barely shutting off the engine before he was out of the car. Natalie followed, scanning the platform. Empty. But something felt wrong. Mark stormed toward the ticket booth, where a bored-looking attendant sat behind thick glass. A woman, Mark said, slapping his hands on the counter. Blonde. Mid-30s. Was she here? The man blinked at him, then shrugged. Maybe. People come and go. Natalie stepped forward. Please. She was in trouble. The man sighed, rubbing his eyes, then jerked his head toward the platform. There was a lady like that, yeah. Looked freaked out. Bought a ticket but never got on the train. Natalie felt her stomach drop. She didn't get on. Nope. The man yawned. Train left 5 minutes later. She was gone. Mark inhaled sharply. Gone where? The attendant scratched his head. Looked like someone met her. A cold chill ran through Natalie's spine. Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. What did he look like? The attendant shrugged. Didn't see much. Tall. Dark jacket. Maybe late 40s. Victor. Natalie and Mark exchanged a glance. For the first time that night, she saw it in his eyes, pure, unfiltered fear. Mark turned on his heel and scanned the lot, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He took her, he muttered. He took her. Natalie's breath caught. Then, suddenly, a sound. Faint. Muffled. From somewhere in the shadows beyond the parking lot. A woman's scream. Mark took off before Natalie could even process what was happening. His feet pounded against the pavement as he sprinted toward the sound, his breath ragged, his hands already clenched into fists. Natalie followed, adrenaline surging through her veins. The scream had come from the far end of the lot, past the dim streetlights, near an abandoned service tunnel beneath the tracks. Then she saw them. Claire. And him. A tall figure, gripping her wrist, dragging her toward the tunnel's entrance. The flickering light above them barely illuminated his face, but it was enough. Victor Lane. He was older, leaner, but the look in his eyes was unmistakable, cold, hungry, possessive. Claire thrashed in his grip, panic written all over her face. Mark's roar cut through the night. Get your hands off her. Victor turned, his expression eerily calm, as if Mark was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Ah, he murmured, tilting his head. You must be the husband. Mark didn't slow. He lunged, swinging hard, his fist colliding with Victor's jaw. The crack echoed through the lot, sending Victor stumbling backward. Claire tore free, scrambling toward Natalie, gasping for air. Natalie grabbed her, steadying her. Are you hurt? Claire's hands shook, but she nodded, eyes wide with terror. He found me, she whispered. He always finds me. Meanwhile, Mark and Victor crashed to the ground, grappling violently. Victor was fast, but Mark was furious. Years of betrayal, of lies, of secrets, all of it exploded in raw rage as he drove his fist into Victor's ribs. Victor grunted but twisted, slamming an elbow into Mark's temple. Mark faltered. Victor reached into his coat, a flash of silver. Natalie's heart stopped. Mark. Claire broke free from Natalie's grasp, grabbing a rusted metal pipe from the ground. Without hesitation, she swung. The pipe connected with Victor's arm, sending the knife flying into the darkness. He howled in pain, staggering back. Mark didn't waste the opening. He lunged, tackling Victor to the pavement, his fists raining down until the man beneath him went limp. The night fell silent. Mark, chest heaving, pushed himself up. Blood dripped from his knuckles. Victor groaned weakly, but he wasn't getting up. Not this time. Claire collapsed into Natalie, sobbing. Sirens wailed in the distance. Natalie exhaled, her pulse finally slowing. It was over. Mark turned, his eyes locking onto Claire's. There was no anger now. No accusations. Just exhaustion. Claire swallowed hard. I should have told you. Mark nodded slowly. Yeah. His voice was hoarse. You should have. The blue and red lights painted the night as police cars swarmed the lot. Officers rushed toward them, weapons drawn. But it didn't matter. Victor Lane wasn't running anywhere. And Claire? She was finally free.